Welcome back to Sika Psychology. Welcome back to the series where we talk about sports psychology, performance psychology, and we answer a lot of your questions. Today, we're just going to answer your questions. So over the last few months, there's been questions building up over different videos, not just Sika Psychology videos, and asking about kind of particular aspects of sports or performance psychology. And now we're going to answer some of them. I've cherry picked these ones because I think they're interesting. If you have more questions, or even if you've asked a question previously in one of the videos, just pop it down in the comments below and I'll try and get to it ASAP. Wojciech Dragowski asks, could you guys possibly elaborate a little on the effects of coming off drugs? Is gains loss and potential psychological effect of it usually significant? Is it an issue at all? Thanks. I'm just going to assume this is coming off performance enhancing drugs due to the nature of our channel and the fact that we talk about sports, and this particular video is what's it like to coach athletes on steroids. It's a comment on that video, so I'm going to make that assumption. So the first thing we need to talk about is that the number one side effect, the side effect with highest prevalence of AAS use, anabolic androgenic steroid, is psychological neuroticism. Many people who take substances, performance enhancing drugs, will have some sort of psychological side effect from it. Now, due to their nature, many of these side effects are things like increased aggression, increased neuroticism, increased fixation on certain topics, lack of ability to control emotion well. These things may not be a bad thing in sport, and that's the kind of messed up thing. I know we've talked to Broderick before specifically about the psychological aspects of performance enhancing drug use, and the fact that many of these side effects are why you want them, right? You want lower pain tolerance, you want more aggression, you want a faster fuse, if you will. But for most people living in everyday life, you don't want that. You don't want to be the cage fighter just about to go into the ring when you're doing that for 24 hours a day. Now, there's multiple other psychological side effects that come along with the drug use, but specifically with the effects of coming off drugs, there's some very noted things you need to look at. So the immediate thing we look at is how our kind of hormone profile will change. If you imagine you immediately have a falling off of testosterone, you may have a falling off of growth hormone as well, so IGF-1. But what you're going to have is that sustained increased level of estrogen for longer. So you will have a quite severe psychological reaction, or you may have a quite severe psychological reaction to coming off. And that's purely due to kind of hormonal levels as those drugs cycle out of your system and as you come back to homeostasis. Now, as a purely kind of psychological adjunct to that, I think it's very important to talk about the nature of coming off and what's going to happen, right? We've heard drug use being referred to in the past as being able to play at a poker table with unlimited poker chips, right? The disadvantage is you can never come away from the poker table and you can never cash those chips in for something else. Now, that's not strictly true, right? Because you do come away from the head use poker table with some kind of long lasting effects, and certainly you're coming away from that as a different organism. And I know there's many debates being held on kind of the length of drug bans due to the fact that your physiology could essentially be forever changed by the use of PEDs as you're no longer taking them or after you've stopped taking them. So when we're talking about coming off, it's really important to note that you will have some level of maintained enhancement, right? But what most people will really struggle with is the kind of downturn in performance, right? So you will absolutely, if you're no longer taking the performance enhancing substances, at a certain point you'll obviously have a decrease in performance. That's very difficult for many people to deal with, many athletes to deal with. What you then also have is the kind of compounding factor that you're no longer able to do the same amount of training, which you might kind of reach out to try and achieve those same results. So most people who are watching these videos are amateur athletes, beginner to intermediate level, even into the slightly advanced level. But you're not going to be able to stay on forever. And that's where the issues occur, is where you've taken whatever you've taken, you've achieved this increased level of output or increased level of performance. Now when you come off, there's going to be an issue, right? You need to be incredibly honest with yourself, and these are conversations and decisions you need to make far before you ever take the initial steps of understanding what the level of decrease is going to be. Is it likely that you could detrain yourself to a level lower than when you started? Yes. Is it likely that when taking some sort of substance you could become injured and end up being weaker than you were before, or slower than you were before, or in worse shape than you were before? Yes. Are there other inherent risks with taking these compounds that might mean you could get an infection, or you could have some sort of other complication that will leave you in a worse place than you were before? Yes. If you're having that conversation before you start, you're kind of broaching this topic, or you're bridging this gap before you even get there, you know. A lot of the time it's if someone jumps straight in and now they say, okay, it's been the best 3 or 4 months of my life and now I have to come off, and how am I going to deal with this coming off? This is really a conversation you should have had with yourself before you ever started. Up next, then, we have a question from That2Guy, a regular commenter on our live streams. Could you all do something? I'm just going to say, could you all do something on the difference between an injury and an owie? In wrestling, we used to call it the difference between being hurt and injured. Maybe a Sika psychology video. So this is, we'll talk about the psychological aspects of it. Obviously, there's physiological aspects to this. The difference between something being just sore from training, possibly something like DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. The difference between that and being a small bit achy from training, and the actual difference between that and an injury. We won't go into that. But psychologically, there are obviously some massive difference between being injured currently and now just being a bit sore from training. Most of the time where I'll draw that line is it going to, in the kind of medium term, directly affect my performance, right? So obviously, if you go to the gym and you do 4 sets of 10 and 50% on the back squat, your quads and your back might be a bit sore the next day, right? That level of soreness isn't an issue. Psychologically, I don't think it should be an issue. You should be able to go and train maybe the day after or 2 days after. You might be a bit stiff as you warm up, but that's a recoverable level, right? That falls within a bracket of something you might refer to as maximum recoverable volume, right? You haven't surpassed that MRV value. Where it becomes an issue is where people start convincing themselves or talking themselves into the fact that, oh, this chronic injury which is now developed is actually just more of that training pain, right? So the pain we might get, the muscular soreness we might get from training or lifting weights, sprinting, running, whatever that might be, or maybe even some sort of joint tightness from a large training volume. There's a massive difference between that and the starting off of a chronic injury, right? That level of volume and intensity that we have, that we're able to recover from well, and that's actually vital for our adaptation, is significantly lower than the level of intensity and volume that's going to create a chronic injury. Now, psychologically, how are you going to draw the line in between those two things? It should probably be some sort of multidisciplinary team is helping you on that. It should certainly be some sort of qualified medical professional will diagnose an injury as that injury has happened, or after that injury has happened. It shouldn't just be you, or it shouldn't just be you and your coach saying, it's okay, your knees are sore. It's been 3 months and your knees are still sore. It's okay. Like, there's a certain level of knee pain, joint discomfort is absolutely part of training. When that becomes inhibitory to everyday training or everyday life, or you have that for a length of time where you know you need to stop and pull back, then you need to bring in another member of the team, or you should have somebody else helping you on that aspect. Another thing where I think it's really important that you should be addressing the kind of psychological difference between these two is how you draw the line between what's doable or feasible or kind of livable with on a daily basis, and that which is now inhibitory, right? So for many people, if you're going to be sitting at a desk all day and your hip flexors are really tight, or your back is really sore, or your neck and shoulders are really sore, that's in no way feasible, right? Now, that level of neck discomfort or upper back discomfort might be very, very normal for somebody doing some quite intense neck training or upper back training. And like, that level of training actually does require some level of DOMS, and the fact that posturally those muscles are very, very in demand, that's an unfortunate fact of training your neck, just to use that specific part of your body as an example. That's unfortunate, right? If you want to be a judo world champion and you're doing a lot of neck training in your off season, you sitting at a desk and being slightly uncomfortable as you look at your laptop is just going to be a fact of life for that, right? But for the amateur athlete, or the athlete who might actually need to not be in pain for vast amounts of their life, or for the majority of their life, it's very important that you understand where that line is. If you wake up in the morning and for the first 2, 3, 4 minutes of you walking around you're a bit tight, a bit stiff, that's probably okay, or that might be okay for you. But now if it's 12 noon and you're still sore, that might be where you draw the line, And we all like to have this thing of, I have very high pain tolerance, and so where I draw the line is different for everyone else. That doesn't matter. You just need to have that set in your own head of, this is a level of discomfort I'm living with each day. I'm ready to deal with each day. Now, understanding that this level of discomfort in no way affects performance. And now on the other side, you have, this is a level of discomfort or pain that I'm not willing to deal with or live with every day, right? This becomes particularly apparent, or particularly an issue, when you look at some fighting sports, because you have people who are now incredibly open to spending a massive amount of their day or their year or their training block in a huge amount of pain, and they blur the gap between these two things very, very severely, right? So we obviously have this issue with jiu-jitsu people all the time, where they're so used to being in pain and discomfort that now something that is actually an acute injury, or the beginnings of a chronic injury, suddenly meshes into, oh no, that's okay, it's an amount of pain I'm willing to train with. You need to be setting those boundaries and setting those lines early on. Ritik Nair says, sports psychology question: when you follow your own strength program, should I think about my program and make changes because I'm training? Because when I'm training, I feel like the volume is low. For example, in my program, I've written 70% for 6x6 of 1RM for 4 weeks, twice a week. But after 2 weeks, I feel the volume is low. Your thoughts? So a couple of things on this. The first thing, my thought is that if you're qualified enough, experienced enough, and objective enough to be able to write your own strength program, you should believe in the version of yourself that wrote it 2 weeks ago, right? There's actually a video coming out on my squat cycle leading into my squat last week, and we'll go through each session and why each session was that way. Ritik, if you're in the position where you're a strength coach or strength and conditioning coach or powerlifting or weightlifting coach, and you understand, in this case, squat programming, if you understand all of those variables and how you react to those variables, and you understand your own individual case, then you should believe the version of you 2 weeks ago that made up that plan, and don't start doubting that version of you right now, right? So it's not like you will have massively learned anything in the last 2 weeks. Now, there is a case to be made where, due to the need to gain experience, or the want to gain experience, or due to some other factors, you feel like you want to write your own programming and you're not really equipped to write your own programming. That's where the issues occur here. And that's where we get this thing of, I've done 70% for 6x6. Firstly, I hope you're not just doing 70% 6x6 for 4 weeks, twice a week, and not increasing the weight. But assuming you're not doing that, and assuming you're making incremental increases week by week, whether that be in volume or intensity, assuming that's correct, the issue arises where the experience level isn't there when you're writing the program, and you say, okay, week 1 I'm going to do 6x6 at 70%, week 2 I'm going to do 6x6 at 75%, and week 3 I'm going to do 6x6 at 80%. And you don't have the experience to say, okay, I should have actually made a 7.5% jump, or I should have made a 2.5% jump. That's unfortunate, right? Because in that case, you're negatively affecting yourself by not altering the program to a level of intensity that's correct. But much more seriously than that, you're going to negatively affect your ability to write programs effectively in the future if you change it now. And this is the case where we've talked about the sledgehammer method before. So if you have to kill a crazy turkey that's in front of you, and you have a host of tools available, a shotgun's probably the best tool, but you just have a sledgehammer here. The sledgehammer isn't the best tool, but it will still get the job done. That's very much the case when we look at programming, right? A lot of the time we'll run around looking for this correct tool forever, and by the time we've actually found it or decided what the correct tool is, the crazy turkey has ravaged us and murdered us, right? It's very important you stick to something. And sticking to something and being consistent with the training and trusting the process is much, much more important than you changing the program every 2 or 3 weeks for kind of 4 months and never really getting anywhere, because you're constantly trying to find that perfect butter zone, you know. Even if you're slightly outside of that perfect zone of volume and intensity, but you're sticking to something repeatedly from week to week, that is far more valuable.